Here are 5 best ETFs to invest in. By the way, 2 of them made me over $40,000 last year. The first ETF I like is VU. VU is Vanguard's S&P 500 fund. It tracks the S&P 500 index, which include 500 of the largest US companies across various industries. It's one of the most popular ETFs because it represents a broad slice of the US stock market. In terms of holdings, it's heavily weighted in large cap stocks like Apple, Microsoft, and Nvidia. These 3 stocks comprise roughly 20% of the fund holdings. The top sectors include information technology, financials, and healthcare. Historically, the S&P 500 has returned around 8 to 10% annually over the long term. But this of course fluctuates based on the market cycles. VU's performance recently has been amazing and well beyond the 8 to 10% range. For example, it returned 30% last year and almost 85% in the last 5 years. One of the reasons why I love VU specifically over other S&P 500 funds like SPY is because it has an extremely low expense ratio of 0.03%. The lower the expense ratio, the more money you will make. This ETF is ideal for those who want broad US stock market exposure with low fees. Warren Buffett, the greatest investor of our time, said, "In my view, for most people, the best thing to do is own the S&P 500 index fund." In his letter to Berkshire Hathaway, his advice to trustees was, put 10% of the cash in short-term government bonds and 90% in a very low-cost S&P 500 index fund. I suggest Vanguard's. Numerous times he's also said that the S&P 500 fund would likely outperform most pension funds and institutions. So the S&P 500 could be a great ETF choice to invest in. Personally, I'm investing in Vanguard's S&P 500 index fund within my 401k plan, and the performance has been really good. It returned 22% year to date, while the 1-year performance is at 44%. One concern people have with VU is its concentrated exposure to high cap companies, and some people prefer VTI. So this brings me to the second ETF I really like, VTI. VTI is Vanguard's total stock market ETF. The fund seeks to capture the entire US stock market, including large, mid, and small cap companies. This ETF gives exposure to 3,600 stocks, making it highly diversified. Like VU, VTI's largest holdings are big tech and healthcare, but it also includes many mid and small cap stocks, providing more comprehensive US market exposure. One thing that I would like to mention is that VU and VTI holdings overlap 87% by weight. So there is no real point in buying both, just select one or the other. However, some people use them in parallel for tax loss harvesting, where an investor would sell, say, VTI at a loss and immediately buy back VU to avoid a wash sale. As you would imagine, VTI performs similarly to VU due to the holdings overlap. For example, $10,000 invested on January 1st of 2015 would yield 12.34% with VTI and 12.92% with VU, or about 0.6% difference per year. Most of that gain came recently as the big cap outperformed small mid cap due to interest rate environment and AI. Over the long term, the total US market index also averaged close to 8 to 10% per year. Just like VU, the expense ratio is at 0.03%. Many investors choose VTI for full market exposure, capturing the potential for growth across all market capitalizations, not just the big ones. It's basically a one-stop shop for those looking to invest in US equities broadly. For me, aside from the 401k plan, VTI is about 50% of my investment portfolio. I really like the one-stop shop for VTI, and the performance has been really good. Over the last 5 years, it returned 81%. In the last year, in one of my brokerage accounts, VTI returned me about $18,000 on roughly $80,000 invested. The third ETF I like is VGT. VGT is Vanguard's information technology ETF. It focuses on the information technology sector, holding major tech companies that drive innovation and growth. It's a sector-specific ETF, meaning it lacks the diversification of broader market ETFs, but has strong growth potential. VGT holds top technology stocks such as Apple 16%, Microsoft 13%, and Nvidia 13%. These top 3 stocks make up to 40% of the fund's holdings. This concentration can lead to higher gains, but also increases risk, especially if these companies underperform. One thing I also like about VGT is that it also holds some small cap stocks. For example, the fund has 500,000 shares of Ava Technologies, which is an autonomous navigation company, and LivePerson, a developer of conversational commerce and AI software. These stocks have the potential for growth and drive innovation. In terms of performance, the technology sector has been one of the highest highest performing sectors in recent years, and VGT has benefited from this. Its returns have been well above average with high double-digit annual returns over the last decade. For example, in the last 5 years, the fund returned 158%, almost double VTI's 80%. But this performance can be volatile, especially during tech downturns. Many investors choose VGT for focused growth in the tech sector. It's an appealing option for those who believe technology will continue to drive future growth and are comfortable with its risks. VGT's expense ratio is also low for a sector ETF at 0.1% compared to a 0.95% industry average. For me, I have 81,000 invested in VGT, or roughly 45% of my brokerage account. One of the reasons why I invest in VGT is that I'm relatively young and can stomach all the short-term fluctuations and can hold it for the next 30 years. If you're preparing to retire soon, I personally would be hesitant to invest in VGT due to its tax exposure. Now, all three of these ETFs are US-focused ETFs, and that's okay for me, as many of the stocks that I hold through these ETFs have exposure to international markets. As an immigrant, I'm a big believer in US efficiency and the economy. But some people prefer to get some international stocks, which brings me to the fourth ETF, VXUS. VXUS is Vanguard's total international stock ETF. It covers both developed and emerging markets outside the United States. It includes a diversified mix of companies across various sectors and regions. Major holdings include companies from Europe, Asia, and emerging markets, which provide broad diversification. The fund leans toward developed market, but also includes exposure to emerging economies with 27% of the holdings. Some of the biggest holdings include Taiwan Semiconductor Company, Novo Nordisk, a Danish healthcare company, and Tencent Holdings, a Chinese technology company focused on internet-based services. In terms of performance, VXUS has been pretty volatile due to the currency, geopolitical factors, and instability. In the last 5 years, it returned only 15%. VXUS is ideal for investors looking to diversify beyond the US and benefit from global growth opportunities. As I mentioned, I stay away from international stocks, but don't take my advice for it. Think it through for yourself. The last ETF is BND, Vanguard's Total Bond Market ETF. This fund provides broad exposure to the US bond market, including government and corporate bonds across various maturities. It's designed for income and stability rather than growth. BND holds thousands of bonds, mostly US Treasury and investment-grade corporate bonds. The average maturity is around 8 years, making it a medium duration bond ETF. BND averaged around 2 to 4% annually. It's very sensitive to interest rate changes, so performance can vary depending on the environment. BND's expense ratio is also low at 0.03%. The main reason why someone should invest in BND is for stability and income, particularly when you want to balance the volatility of stocks. For me, since I'm young, I don't invest in BND, but once I reach my 40s or 50s, I would certainly lower my equity exposure by using bonds. However, if you're risk averse, you could get some exposure to bonds, and this can be a great fund. If you're unsure of your comfort level, I highly recommend going through the Vanguard's investor questionnaire. The quiz asks you questions about what would you do in a hypothetical situation and how would you react to certain cases to determine your ideal asset allocation. Overall, I believe 2 to 3 of these ETFs out of the 5 is all you would need for a successful portfolio. Keep it simple, watch the fees, invest for the long term, and you'll do really well. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe. I'm hoping to reach 1,000 subscribers soon and would love for you to join me. If you have any feedback on the videos, please leave a comment.